Well, folks, here we are at another episode of Stories for Healing. As you all know by now, this is a project that started at the end of October and is rolling forward just wonderfully, where we bring together storytellers from around the world to tell stories of healing and reconciliation. Now, why do we do that? Oh, I hope that's pretty obvious. Living in times that are full of such division and just plain stress, that we need to hear something other than I'm right and you're wrong, or this is good and that's bad. We need to know how to come together and how to tell stories and hear stories that are about healing and reconciliation. And so that's what we do. Every weekday, we have a story told by some wonderful storyteller on those themes. And today, we're very fortunate to have Cindy Rivka Marshall here to tell a story for us. And Cindy, please tell us a story.
Thank you, Jim. So good to be here. This is my adaptation of a Jewish folktale. There once was a young mother who was so worried about her children. She could see them growing thin and weak before her eyes. There hadn't been enough to eat in weeks. One morning, she gave them, her children, her portion of the food and went to work hungry. And then she nearly fainted while she was out working in the fields. Her friend gave her a crust of bread and looked at her with concern. The young mother said, "It's just not right. We are the ones who are growing these crops. We are harvesting the fields. And then the king is taking all of this food and using it to feed his guests at his fancy parties at the palace. And meanwhile, we are not getting enough to eat. It's just not right." Her friend agreed, but looked at her and said, just don't do anything foolish. Now, the peasants were not supposed to go anywhere near the palace. But early the next morning, that young mother walked up the hill, and she went around the back of the palace. Now, no one was around, and she saw that the door to the kitchen was open. And as she stood there, the aroma of freshly baked bread reached her. Oh, she could almost taste it. Creeping closer, she looked in and saw that no one was in the kitchen, but there were loaves and loaves of bread there cooling on the table. Surely they won't miss just one loaf of bread. And so she dashed in, took a loaf of bread, put it under her coat, and was about to run off when the cook came in and saw her. "Stop, thief!" "Oh, please, just one loaf of bread. My children are starving." Well, the cook looked at her with pity and probably would have just let her go. But that yell about the thief, well, it had called the attention of the guard who came running. "What is this? Stealing from the king?" And he took that loaf of bread, threw it on the ground, and grabbed the woman roughly by the arm. He brought her to the king's chamber. Now the king was sitting at his desk, signing royal documents, and barely looked up when the guard announced, "This woman was caught stealing from the king." "Well, you know the consequence of that. Have her put to death." Well, the young mother could not believe her ears. For stealing one loaf of bread, he was going to put her to death? She had to think of something. What would happen to her children? And just at that moment, her hand went into her pocket and found one single pomegranate seed. and it gave her an idea. As she was being led away, she said, loud enough for the king to hear, "It's too bad that the secret of the pomegranate seed will die with me." The king looked up. "What is this?" "Oh, it's just that, well, my parents and their parents before them have passed along this special secret about how to plant a pomegranate seed. And if you do it in such a way, it will grow right before your eyes and bear fruit. But I have not had a chance yet to teach my children, and so the secret will die with me." "I want to see this magic tree grow before our eyes. Servant, have her brought out to the royal garden." And so, assembled there in the garden was the royal gardener, the king, and several of his advisors. And they all stood around as the woman instructed the gardener to dig a small hole in the soil. And then she went over and dropped the seed in the soil. The gardener put more soil on top and watered it, and they all stood there waiting. And nothing happened. The young mother thought, now surely the king will realize I have been making this up, and he will put me to death. But then she thought, I just remembered something. You see, the magic only works if the person who has planted the seed has never stolen anything before. And so the woman knelt down and took the seed back out of the soil, and she said, "Maybe one of you could plant the seed, because I stole a loaf of bread this morning because my children are hungry. But surely one of you could do it." And she went over to one of the king's advisors. But he refused. "No, it won't work if I plant the seed. When I was a boy, my neighbor had a pocket knife, and I really wanted one. I wanted to learn how to whittle. I stole his pocket knife. It's a small thing, but still, it won't work for me to plant the seed." And so the young mother went over to another of the king's advisors. It happened to be the royal accountant. "Oh, well, I better not be the one to plant the seed. You see, it is my job to add and subtract the royal sums, and sometimes I do that a little in my favor. I better not be the one to plant the seed." And one by one, each of the advisors had a reason why they had done something, however small, of taking something that wasn't their own. Until the only one left was the king. Well, he took the seed, he dropped it into the soil, and again they waited for it to spring into a big tree before their eyes. But again, nothing happened. And just as the young mother was sure she would be led to her death, the king got a faraway look in his eye. "When I was a boy, my father had a necklace, with gems that were so beautiful. One day, I went into his room and I saw it sitting there. When I held it in the sunlight, it cast rainbows around the room. I wanted that necklace. I took it, and then I forgot all about it. Not even when my father's servant was accused of the crime and later put to death. I didn't tell anyone. I see that my laws are perhaps too harsh. Even I cannot live up to them. I will not have this woman put to death. I, in fact, would welcome to hear from you. Oh, well, the young mother now had more courage to speak up. She said, well, the only reason that I stole that loaf of bread this morning is that my children are hungry. The peasants haven't had enough food to eat for weeks. The food that's been distributed is just not sufficient at all to feed us. Oh, well, I had no idea, said the king. Well, surely your family should just come to my palace for a feast and they can have their fill. Thank you, but it's not just my family, it's all of the peasants. Oh, well then all of the peasants are welcome to the palace. And the doors were flung open, and the peasants came and ate their fill. But still, that young mother was not satisfied. She said to the king, surely there's something you could do to make sure this doesn't happen again. And that's when he had a new idea. I will make you one of my advisors. And so that young woman became one of the king's advisors. She saw to it that food was shared equitably throughout the kingdom. And from that time on, the peasants did not have to go hungry or resort to stealing in order to survive. Well, that young mother lived a long life, and she often would tell her children the story of the magic pomegranate seed.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. There we are. Thank you so much, Cindy. What a great story. I'm wondering, um, the part that really spoke to me in this familiar but lovely tale is how she stood up for the other peasants. Because
Yes,
a lot of times we hear that the person in danger has been saved, and that's often where it ends. So,
right.
can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this is a folk tale that is often known as the clever thief. And it's often told about a man who steals a loaf of bread. And he is clever enough to wheedle his way out of the punishment. Uh, so I was working on a CD a number of years ago of recordings of stories where I took traditional stories and sort of turned them in different ways to give voice to a woman character in the
Mm-hmm.
story.
Mm-hmm.
And so I transposed this into a young mother who is stealing the loaf of bread, but I also infused it with a sense about food insecurity and food justice. And I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to incorporate that theme about the need that exists, unfortunately, very widespread need, that if food could be distributed more equally, that in fact we have enough to feed the
Sure.
world.
Sure.
And so that was a message that I wove into the story.
Very, very nice. And it extends beyond that, really, doesn't it? In the sense of whatever our challenge might be, looking for a solution that includes others, not just a solution for ourselves.
Yes, yes, very, very true. And, I also think that there's something about being able to speak up, like you
Yes.
say.
Yes.
And also that one reason I chose the story for this program that you're putting together is that I felt like the king was pushed to see things from a different point of view,
Hmm.
that he had been unaware somehow, right, of the fact that the peasants were hungry, and that he had to see things from her point of view. And
Yes.
so I think that's so crucial at this time
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
always for people to be able to have that kind of awareness.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. You've woven so much into there. Again, letting a woman have a voice in one of these traditional tales, where if they appear, they're lucky, let alone have a voice. Um,
Yeah.
is a nice thing too. All the ways of stretching us. You mentioned you have a collection of these stories.
I do. I had put together a recording several years ago. It's called "By the River: Voices of Women in Jewish Stories," and it has a number of these kinds of adaptations
Great.
where I imagined a woman character into a traditional story
Yeah,
and
yeah.
give her a voice. Yeah.
And did more than just changing it from a man's name to a woman's name,
Oh yeah.
obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to give power, like you're saying, to
right,
that voice
right.
and meaning. Yeah.
Very good. Well, I want to remind everyone that this is a good example of why we do these stories. We're here really to bring healing and reconciliation through stories without saying specifically, you're a good person, you're a bad person. We're able in this story to see that everybody has different sides to them and that we just need to be able to see and hear each other. We can start to move forward together. Visit us here on Transformational Storytelling's Facebook page, where we do these stories every weekday. You can also find them archived over on the YouTube playlist, so that if you missed one and you don't want to search through your scroll, you can go over there and watch the ones you missed or rewatch the ones you want to watch over again. And more importantly, though, start telling each other stories of the things that really matter, of what's important to us as people, and recognizing the humanity in each of us as we go forward. So thank you again, and we'll see you the next day.